Dare to enter Crow's Quill's books, where tales of forgotten realms and fearless souls come alive. Today's journey, Plato Wyngard and the Valley of the Immortals, Chapter 12, by Mark and James Lindsay. Will you uncover the truth hidden in the shadows? Chapter 12. Do you actually know where this runway is? Asked a frustrated Luther. He had been circling the mountain for 30 minutes and was now silently thankful he had both fuel tanks topped up. I'm sure it's right over there, Bion replied. You've said that several times already, Luther muttered, while scanning for the dirt runway Bion had described. Anyone would think that you have purposely had us zigging and zagging above the mountain so that we wouldn't be able to find it again, Plato said with a wry smile. Well, it was easier than blindfolding you, Bion replied, smiling back. There it is, just as you described it, Luther said, pointing towards what most would describe as a dirt path. Are they expecting us? Plato asked. Be unfortunate if some tribesman with an itchy bowfinger started a firefight. If we get into a firefight, your plane will be jam inside a crater before you unholster your weapons, Plato, Bion said, silencing the two men. Luther landed the C-123 like a true bush pilot, with minimal fuss and prayer. Plato barely flinched as they came in, although he was starting to get nervous, due mainly to the eerie silence and zero signs of habitation. So, everyone at work today? Luther said to break the tension. None will show until they see a familiar face. In fact, we have about 60 more seconds before the explosions start. Unless they see my face, that is, Bion replied. Well, how about we escort you out now? Plato said, standing and heading towards the exit ramp. As soon as Bion stepped off the ramp, there appeared 40 men out of the elephant grass, all armed with assault rifles. The business ends pointed in their direction. The entire plane was surrounded. Plato then noticed a crouched figure close to 100 meters to the front of the aircraft, with a Soviet-made rocket, propelled launcher aimed at the plane's nose. Even from this distance, Plato could see that the man was grinning broadly. I'm glad we're here on a friendly mission, Luther muttered. After their declaration of friendship was made, the locals began to unload the supplies. As this occurred, Plato, Luther, and Hutt unrolled camouflage netting and carefully covered the plane. When they had first acquired the C-123, they had taken great effort to demilitarize it. But at the same time, when repainting, they had used neutral earthy tones to help it blend into the landscape. So along with the netting, the Thunder Pig, as Luther had christened it, was invisible to prying eyes. Once the plane was unloaded, Bion approached Plato, who was busy running a diagnostic check on the ramp hydraulics. I have just received word from my father. You are to be our guests for dinner tonight, Bion said, although she looked less than thrilled by the news. As much as we would like to comply with... What he's trying to say is that we would love to comply with your father's request, Luther said from behind. Wonderful, Bion said, her face expressing the contrary. We'll leave in 30 minutes. I will allow you to bring the bare minimum, let's say 1 bag per man, shall we? Great, Luther reiterated. Bion nodded and walked over to supervise the movement of her supplies. Both men watched her walk away. Once she was out of earshot, Plato shoved Luther toward the back of the plane. Have you lost your mind? Have you forgotten why we're up here in the first place? Plato said, but Luther just grinned back. What I am doing is saving the day. Yet again, Luther crooned. And how do you figure that? Plato remarked. Do you see the expression every time Bion talks to us? Luther said. Barely held contempt, Plato said. Exactly. Do you think she's going to let us park our plane on her mountain while we go treasure hunting? Luther asked. Probably not. But what you are saying is that if we go up and have dinner with her dear old dad and stay the night, we can slip off and go for a midnight jaunt while everyone else is asleep and take care of business, Plato replied. Well, I wouldn't have put it in those words. But you get the gist of it, Luther said. Did I hear someone say, treasure hunt? A voice behind said. They spun around to find Nat standing there, lighting a cigarette. What did I tell you about smoking around my plane? Plato asked. Nat rolled his eyes but extinguished the cigarette. Were you two talking treasure? Nat asked again. Look, we agreed to take you on, because we were a man short and Bao vouched for you. But the only thing you need to concern yourself with is what, where, and how many sugars. Do I make myself clear? Plato said. Crystal, Nat replied. Excellent. Time is short and we're going to be moving in about 25 minutes. Luther is going to give you a list of things we need to pack. So let's move like we have a purpose, gentlemen, Plato said. It was obvious that Bion didn't want them armed and dangerous, but there was no way Plato was going anywhere without some protection. It was just going to have to be a little covert. The three men made sure that they only took small arms, stashed either on their persons or tucked away in their bags, amongst other necessities. They departed once the tribesmen were ready. Despite their size, they proved quite hardy, carrying large amounts of supplies up through the thick vegetation of the mountainside. Plato and Luther also had quite a bit of experience in this field, as they easily managed their loads along the thin, rocky track. After an hour of hiking, they stood on an outcrop overlooking Bion's village. My God, it's beautiful, Luther muttered. Bion's village was a model, both of self-reliance and aesthetic beauty. All of their huts were built high off the ground, from bamboo and thatch. A waterfall divided the village, and the people had devised means to siphon water directly from the descending water to irrigate vast gardens. Children were learning lessons within an open-walled classroom, and the women all worked together in preparing the village food, surrounded by vast pots containing rice and exotic spices. The entire scene was framed by the jungle canopy and the vibrant vegetation. One of the laborers who had greeted them at the landing strip called out their arrival, his voice echoing down below. The villagers all stopped what they were doing and called back, their cheerful voices replying a warm welcome. It took them another 10 minutes to traverse their way down, and as they entered the village, dozens of children were waiting to greet them. Once they had voiced their initial greetings, they crowded the newest arrivals, their eyes wide with curiosity at the two foreigners, in particular Luther. They have never seen one so big and dark before, Bion said in amusement, the first real smile Plato had seen on the local woman. He noted how beautiful she really was. The children were patting the muscles on Luther's arms in admiration, until Luther growled and scooped the nearest child and tossed him into the air. Plato was shocked, thinking he had lost his mind, when a booming laugh escaped the big man as he easily caught the airborne child, who was squealing with delight, then put him gently down. That was it, as all of the children swamped the rugged African-American for a joyride, and Luther was happy to oblige. Plato stared on, puzzled. He had never seen this side to his partner before. He had witnessed Luther in many other situations, from killing a man with his bare hands in anger, to complete calm under pressure, steering a flaming plane into landing, even seducing exotic women in bars. But never this scene before him. Even Bion seemed surprised by this turn of events. Another smile lit up her face. Plato had to catch himself from staring at her beauty. You have a breathtaking village, Plato said honestly. Thank you. We try hard to be self-reliant and maintain a harmony with our surroundings, Bian said, pleased by Plato's words. Well, you've definitely achieved that, especially considering the past 10 years of war, Plato said. We managed to survive most of the ravages of the war up here, Bian said. Yes, I'd say. You were pretty lucky. Bian turned sharply on Plato, anger flooding her eyes. I said most. We still had the Viet Cong come through from time to time, taking what they wanted, killing on occasion, Bian said. I didn't mean. Plato started to apologize. Of course not. Outsiders never mean to do anything. We lost many young men from our village who went off to help the U.S. It was hard, but we soldiered on, if you'll pardon the pun. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to see my father, Bian said, and stormed off. Luther walked over to Plato, a huge grin on his face and children climbing all over his large frame. What's going on? Luther asked over the squealing of children. Plato looked his partner over with annoyance, although it had more to do with Bian's words than the big man's appearance. Will you stop clowning around? We have a hike to plan, Plato growled and walked off. What did I do? Luther asked, completely puzzled by Plato's outburst. The chieftain wasn't there to greet them on arrival. Having been ill for the past few days, he was indisposed in his quarters. The initial hostile greeting that they had received from the locals had now been replaced with friendly warmth, their status a mixture of minor celebrity and hero status for the cargo that they had delivered. Plato also suspected it had something to do with the way Luther was with the local children. His genuine affection for them was something you couldn't fake. The tiny locals had seen through his tough guy facade and loved the ex-soldier for who they truly believed he was, a gentle giant. They now walked around the village perimeter. To the casual observer, it appeared that they were going for a leisurely stroll and checking out the sights. But in fact, they were conducting a recon into the village security, deciding on the best route that would lead them away later in the night towards their true destination. There's not too much in the way of sentries or early warning. It's almost as if they don't expect any kind of trouble at all, Luther whispered. It's their location here in the mountains. They've gotten used to the fact that not too many people come venturing this far out from civilization, Plato replied. Civilization. Now that's an interesting word. In my experiences, too many people throw that word around without really comprehending its meaning, Luther said flatly. Plato spun around and eyed his large friend. What seems to be the problem? Plato asked. Nothing, Luther replied quickly. Well, it doesn't sound like nothing, Plato said. What do you want me to say? That I don't feel guilty coming here under false pretenses? Luther fumed. False. We just delivered medical aid, Plato shot back. You know what I mean. Hey, our other reason doesn't concern them. In fact, we'll be so quick it'll be completely painless, Plato said. Doesn't concern them. We've got ourselves involved with some pretty bad sorts. I don't want anything to come back and hurt these nice people, Luther said. Plato sighed. Look, if it makes you feel any better, I don't want anything bad to happen either. This whole mess has kind of gotten a little out of hand. I'm the first to admit it. But the fact of the matter is that we have little choice, Plato said. We always have a choice, Luther interrupted. Not always. We both agreed to get involved in this, and now there's no turning back, Plato said, with finality, and walked away, to continue with his recon. Yeah, we both agreed all right, Luther muttered, and pondered the true meaning of their agreement. With a full day to plan their night's operation, Plato felt very confident with how they would be able to conduct it, with no consequences for villages. Even Luther conceded that if everything went to plan, their hosts would be none the wiser. The only problem that they now confronted was the ability of their third man to carry out his side of the mission. Nat's cocky attitude and tall tales seemed at odds with his youth and character, but they had little choice in the matter. They would now have to depend on whether he could deliver the goods, both literally and figuratively. Bian collected them from their accommodation just before sundown. She had changed her clothes from the earlier Western-styled hiking apparel to those of the other village women. A layered dress in various colors, and her hair up and held under a similarly colored hat. Plato smirked on her arrival. "Something funny?" Bian asked. "Nothing, just not used to seeing you go native," Plato replied, indicating her new dress sense. "Hey, this is our traditional clothing." Bian's voice trailed off as she realized Plato was having a small joke at her expense. "Ah, Western humor," Bian said. Plato sighed. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be rude. I actually think you look quite pretty," Plato said sincerely. "Pretty? Just pretty?" Bian replied. Plato was flustered. "Ah, that's not what I meant," Plato said. "So you don't think I'm pretty?" Bian replied. "No, yes, I think it's her turn at having a joke at your expense," Luther said, walking up behind the blushing Plato. And both Luther and Bian laughed at his embarrassment. "Ah, an old army buddy would say that I've just been quick-scoped," Plato replied. "Yeah, you certainly were. But you were right. Bian is definitely looking beautiful tonight," Luther observed. "Why, thank you," Bian beamed, in an over-the-top response to the big man's compliment. She then held her arm out, and Luther quickly took it, leading her away towards dinner. "Everyone's a comedian," Plato said sourly and stomped out, followed closely by Nat. The night's dinner was a true spectacle. The local villagers had turned out a real feast in appreciation of the medical supplies that had been delivered. Tables, barely a foot off the ground, had been arranged in a large box shape with the diners facing in. Plato, Luther, and Nat were seated at the head table in honor of the esteem in which the village held them. Bian sat at Plato's side, an empty chair on her right. "I see your father is still ill. Is there anything that we can do to help?" Plato offered. "No, nothing that a few more days in bed won't help," Bian replied. "Listen about earlier. You don't need to apologize. Despite my upbringing, I'm well aware of Western humor. I know you were only paying me a compliment," Bian said, and smiled that killer smile that made Plato's heart skip a beat. Before he could respond, the food arrived. About a dozen women bearing large plates of local cuisine arrived. Dishes containing soups, rice and pork rolls, chicken casseroles, savory pancakes, and small fried cakes, to name just a few of the feast's delicacies. Starting at the head table, everyone was served efficiently. The three new arrivals did a double take as the food was placed before them. "Oh yeah," Luther said, as if he were witnessing a religious miracle. Not that Plato could fault him, as his own stomach growled loudly, and he realized that neither Luther nor he had eaten in over 24 hours. Quests and adventure could wait while they satiated their appetites. Luther pushed his plate away and sighed with contentment. The Detroit-born ex-soldier had managed to eat the equivalent of a small cow. His unparalleled appetite had many of the local women gasping with lust when they cast a gaze towards him. Even Plato felt that he was backed against the ropes with what he could only assume was a bad case of the meat sweats. Bian glanced at her guests and felt pride for her people at the banquet they had provided. She then stood up and tapped a small gong positioned in front of her. At the sound of the gong, everyone fell silent and listened to her announcement. As always, I am very proud of my family and friends, Bian said. There was a ripple of applause from everyone. We have organized this banquet in thanks to the brave individuals who have delivered our much-needed medical supplies. But this banquet also commemorates all of us, and the hard work we have done to organize the delivery of this much-needed medicine to our people, Boan said with tear-filled eyes. Everyone present got to their feet and applauded her sentiment. After a minute, Bian waved them to silence. So, without any further posturing, let the feast continue, Bian announced. And more plates continued to arrive. Even Luther was starting to look worried. That seals today's tale in shadows. We hope Plato Wyngard and the Valley of the Immortals has drawn you deeper into its enigma. Return soon to Crow's Quill's books, where the next chapter awaits, whispering secrets yet untold.